Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Nickerson, and I'm a director here at Old Line Government Affairs, and we welcome you to another edition of Online with Old Line. For this edition, I'm really excited to introduce Senator Justin Reedy. He's representing District 5 in Carroll County. Welcome, Senator Reedy. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Great to be here. So
I'm going to give a little bit of background to start us off, and then I'd like you to help me out, fill in the blanks, anything that I miss here, and then we'll go from there. Senator Reedy grew up in Carroll County after moving here at age 11 from Mississippi. He became interested in public policy at a very young age and was involved with community service as well as youth leadership through his church. He's a self-employed communications and advertising consultant who served time as staff. I hate to say served time as staff in both the House of Delegates and the State Senate, and served twice as the Maryland Republican Party executive director. Senator Reedy was elected to the House of Delegates in 2010, where he served on the House Health and Government Operations Committee and was Chief Deputy Whip for the House Republican Caucus. He was appointed by Governor Larry Hogan to the Senate in February of 2015 to replace Senator Joe Getty, who resigned to join the governor's administration. Since being in the Senate, he served on Judicial Proceedings Committee, and this year was asked to serve on the Senate Finance Committee, which we were grateful for because he's been a great addition for that committee. And that committee is tasked with handling any legislation that relates to financial institutions, credit regulation, insurance, economic development, utility regulation, workers' comp. I could kind of go on. It covers so many different things. So let's go ahead and get started, Senator Reedy. To get us rolling, can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and tell us about your district that you represent?
Sure. Well, I am really probably the best thing in my life is my family. My wife, Ruth, and I have been married since 2005. We were married when we were 13 years old. Seems that way. We have two children, Brooklyn and Caleb. One is my daughter, Brooklyn's 9, and my son, Caleb's 5. And we live in Manchester, Maryland, Northeast Carroll County. I kind of grew up, once we moved here, I grew up in sort of the Westminster and New Windsor area and lived there. My wife and I lived in Westminster for a while. Now our home is in Manchester, but we love Carroll County. My district is very, is rural and suburban and small towns, so it's a mix. Carroll County is known for being a very strong agricultural and rural community, which it still is, but we've also had over the years, it's grown, and there's a part of us that is sort of suburban to Baltimore. Part of Carroll County is kind of suburban to sort of the DC area. And then there's still a lot of great farmland and open space and small towns. So it's a great place to live and raise a family. And we invite anybody listening to come out and spend some money in Carroll County at some of our great restaurants and agricultural tourism locations. You mentioned I actually work for a firm called Majority Strategies now that does marketing and advertising communications. I was self-employed for a long time. And work as a strategist for them sort of in the mid-Atlantic region. Just really enjoy being able to represent people, the values that I believe in and the values that my constituents believe in, and have a voice, make sure that people have a voice for the things that they're concerned about, the things that they care about. That's the best part about being an elected official. And I like that the state Senate and House of Delegates are both, they're technically part-time. I always laugh about being part-time because part-time. But the nice thing is that all of us are either employed in another job or are retired. Several are retired, but have had it work experience. And so you have that real kind of problem-solving ethos that goes with being in the General Assembly. And you're very obviously close to your community because you live there and you work there. So we love living and representing Carroll County. And my wife is a teacher, a music teacher at Hampstead Elementary School. So kind of been very involved in sort of multiple parts of our community as a family, and church and school and sports and all kinds of stuff. So we definitely enjoy serving and having the opportunity to try to help people. And hopefully make Maryland a better place for, families and retirees and small businesses.
Absolutely. And that Manchester area is beautiful. I've spent quite a
Yes.
bit of time out there. I've got friends that live out there. Um, so you've been a member of the legislature now for over 10 years. What originally inspired you to run for office?
Well, and you mentioned some of my background. I admittedly had a lot of sort of staff and political experience as a
Right.
young person coming out of college. I also actually, that's when I started my own little small business, working with a partner on some different things. Because as you may know, legislative staffers don't get paid a ton of money. And
Yes.
they don't get paid a ton of money on Capitol Hill much, but they certainly don't in the state legislature either. But you get great experience, but it's not a lucrative job. So I kind of was doing that dual track of working as a staffer, and I ended up doing some work for the state Republican Party for a while. And one of the things that I just became so impressed with is the need for us to have strong, energetic, conservative leadership that really, not that the people that were, in the late aughts, we had a lot of really good Republican elected officials in the state, but I also felt like there was a need for sort of fresh, energetic leadership. And I thought I could make a difference. And, also as a staffer and sort of a political guy, you kind of get tired after a while of telling people what you think they ought to say and how they ought to say it. And like, maybe I should just do it. Maybe I want to say it the way I think it ought to be said. And so I decided to run for the House of Delegates in 2010, which was the Tea Party year, big year. I was kind of involved in a lot of that stuff, and still really feel very strongly about the need of us to have limited government and more individual freedom and lower taxes. And we also had a governor, that Martin O'Malley, that was every problem in Maryland he felt could be solved by raising a tax or a fee. And it was really crushing our families and businesses. I still feel like we have too high of a tax burden and a cost of living burden in the state. We've held the line on it more in recent years. Governor Hogan, has certainly gotten the budget back under control. But honestly, I still feel like that's the big fight is this idea of making sure that our cost of living and letting working families be able to afford to stay here is still a big battle. But I got interested in running for that reason. I wanted to, it sounds cliche, but it's make Maryland a place where families can afford to live. And I also now say retirees can afford to live, and businesses can really grow and thrive. And that's why I ran. I care a lot about a lot of other issues as well, as well. But I wanted to get out, so I got out and ran and worked really hard, and was able to get elected to the House of Delegates, and then moved up to the Senate. So it's been a great experience. It definitely doesn't feel like as long as it's been.
Well, I'd argue that if your goal was to add energy on the conservative side, you've definitely done that. So yeah, I think you're one of the most energetic and outspoken, and I love watching you, on the Senate floor speaking, and I think you've done a great job in that respect.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you can watch us now too, because it's.
I know, it's kind of cool, isn't it?
Used to be you had to pick out whose voice was what. So yeah.
Right. Now, is that something they're gonna? I would imagine that moving forward, even without COVID, they're gonna probably keep that in place.
They are.
Good.
And they were piloting it anyway in 2019 in the House, and then now my understanding is it will be permanent, which was long overdue in my view, but I'm glad that now the committees and the floor sessions will be, the committees have been streamed for a long time, but
Right.
Which for those of you, most of your listeners probably know, that's where a lot of the action really, if you really want to get into how you can fix a bill or kill a bill or pass one, the committee is really where some of the real nitty gritty stuff happens. But yes, it's good that the floor sessions are now going to be fully streamed, which I think is good for transparency. And I didn't get the sense that in this last session that anybody was getting up and preening for the cameras. That was always what they argued against. Like, we don't want people getting up and making long-winded speeches just because they're going to be on TV. And I'm like, I don't think anybody's going to. Generally, I don't think that happens. I think it was very good to be able to watch it.
So, having been a congressional staffer at one point, that definitely happens in Congress, definitely. But I would agree. I didn't see that same problem last year in the Maryland session. So you had so much experience coming into office. Were there any surprises for you?
I I was still very young. I was young when I got elected, and so because I'd had legislative staff experience, I I knew where the bathrooms were.
Right.
I knew what third reader and second reader were and all that kind of stuff, which is helpful. Knew how to read bills. I mean, most people that run know how to read a bill, but I just mean sometimes people get there and they have a lot of good ideas, but they really don't have any idea how the process works, which is fine. I mean, it's everybody comes from different places. I was a little surprised by being a member, and I had been away for a couple of years. I hadn't been a staffer for about 3 years, I think, by the time I was elected. But I remember being surprised by, number one, how many meetings you go to as a member
Right.
in the
No
General
doubt.
Assembly. There's subcommittee and there's committee and there's floor session and there's caucus meeting and people want to meet with you in their office, which is fine. All that's fine, but it was just like early on, I was like, I'm having a hard time finding time to even breathe and read any of this stuff I'm getting all these briefings on. And as you get more experienced, you're able to kind of you have the context more. So when you get a document, you know what it relates to. But when you first get elected, even though as a staffer, I had read a lot of stuff, it takes a little while of getting used to that. And there's different pressure. Obviously, being a member, it's all on you.
Sure.
It's your choice. You get to vote. You put a vote up on the board. And obviously, for me, I have some very strong beliefs and views that I think are based in fact and research and values. But of course, there's many things that come across your desk they're not really ideological. They're more what's fair, what's right.
Right.
I was on the health committee, so there's a lot of health stuff that I didn't even really know much about, candidly, and had to learn a lot about. But that was a surprise. I was blessed to be on a committee. I was 4 years in the House, big minority in the House. Republicans only had 43 members. The Senate Republicans only had 12. And Martin O'Malley and the Democrats were really ramming through a lot of things that I thought were completely opposite of the direction I thought we should be going. And I was actually pleasantly surprised the committee I got put on was not as quote unquote partisan as some committees. Obviously, Democrats could get what they wanted when they wanted it, but
Right.
we had Chairman Pete Hammond, who was extremely fair about, if he didn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, if you raised an issue that was like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or hey, we really ought to do this. He was very open to listening. He expected you to show up and do your work, which, I did. And I think, all the Republicans on the committee were good about that. But that was a blessing. So I was pleasantly surprised that even though at the top level, it was very oppressive, I found if you really work hard within your committees and focus on specific areas, you can make an impact. And you have to try not to get discouraged that everything that is happening at the top level isn't what you want, because you have to do I always tell people in my district, I still say this, there's two tracks. There's the top, there's the values that we want to stand for. There's things like lower taxes, respect for all our constitutional rights, but in Maryland, the Second Amendment's always under attack. Other types of values issues, but you can't let the fact that you may lose a lot of votes on that or not get a bill out on a lot of those issues distract you from also trying to do a good job.
Right.
When you have an opportunity to make an impact by being in your committee, reading all the bills, making sure you know what's going on and can have an impact that way.
It's great that you mentioned that, because we've done these interviews with, I would say we're close to around 40 legislators at this point. And that's a theme that comes up regularly. Everybody's so used to reading in the paper about Congress not being able to get anywhere because they're so partisan. But one of the themes that comes up regularly with the members that we've spoken to is that the Maryland legislature is a lot more collegial and works collaborative than Congress, but then most people expect it to be.
Yeah,
So
it is. I mean, I tell you, and we might get into this later, I'm a little worried about where we are now. I feel like the last couple of years, the last year particularly, things got a lot edgier and a little more partisan.
Right.
I'm hopeful we can move back to if all the Republicans say this is a really bad idea, and it's not particularly like taxes versus lower taxes, it's like a question of process. Really, if we can get back to where, hey, let's try to figure out if we can move a way forward. Let's not ram everything through just because we can. But yes, generally, that's one thing I think is better about a state legislature in general. And I've heard this from people I know in red states that are like, we really do try to work on problem solving, not just ramming everything.
Exactly.
There's obviously hot button issues that we're going to be on one side, they're going to be on the other. But if we can have a cooperation about really problem solving, that, you know, and listening to everybody and making sure we get good input from people, I think that's when a state legislature really works best.
Absolutely. So you've been in, like I said, in office for over 10 years now. What is the accomplishment that you're most proud of so far?
I think in the 10 years, I think that there's a couple things. One is, I'll say one thing from just my own personality, and then one from like legislative. One is that I feel like I haven't lost my optimism and energy to really fight for what's right and the direction we ought to go. And I've never ever been somebody who's tried to denigrate the other side and say, well, they're just awful people that, you know,
Right.
there are times I may feel that we're really not getting a fair shake. A lot of times, maybe more lately, but I feel like you have to come to do the fight every day, and you have to bring energy and enthusiasm, and you have to do the work. And so I feel like I've never really let myself get discouraged to the point where I stop doing that. I mean, certainly all of us have our days where we're feeling more worn down. Certainly later in session, it can get that way.
Yep.
So I feel like that's an, I don't know if that's an accomplishment, but it does.
I definitely think it is.
I've seen people burn out where they just get very jaded. And believe me, I'm very realistic. I mean, sometimes I get myself in trouble because someone will ask me, well, why don't we do this? And I'll go, well, that's not really going to work. And that's not what they want to hear. They want me to say, yeah, we should. And I'm kind of like, eh. So I try to be realistic with people. I don't promise people that. I don't do the thing where I say, I'm the only one fighting for you, because that's not true. There are other people working hard. I also don't do the thing where I tell them, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to just do X impossible thing that will never happen.
Right.
I try not to be dishonest. That's why I don't want to be dishonest, to be honest. But at the same time, I think you go in with like, if we do this, if we really let people know what's going on, then we can make a positive difference. So I feel like that's at least some level of accomplishment. But the best legislative accomplishment, I was able in 2019, and this is an example of working in a bipartisan way and not trying to make it all about, you know, about yourself or about, you know, it really trying to work together. We passed a bill that I sponsored. I sponsored it for 2 straight years, but the second year we were able to kind of work out some issues with it. Was Laura and Reed's Law, which is a bill that provided additional protections for pregnant women. It was named after a terrible situation with a young woman named Laura, who had been carrying a child, but Maryland does not allow you to prosecute for the death of an unborn baby until after 20 plus weeks, because that's considered viability. And this woman had been murdered by her boyfriend, who was the father of the child, savagely, just premeditated execution style murder of this woman after they had just gone to the sonogram and determined it was going to be a boy and picked out a name, Reed, at 14 weeks. And he did it. And I learned so much more. I knew domestic abuse and was a huge problem. I had no idea that pregnant women are like exponentially more times likely to be abused, which to me is so shocking, because it's like your spouse or your loved one is pregnant. You'd think even a knucklehead would be like, well, let me take care of them. But it's the opposite, because an abuser wants to control, and you are not in control when you're in that situation. And so apparently it was a huge epidemic nationwide, and Maryland had one of the worst rates of the second leading cause of death for pregnant women in Maryland was like homicide, or so. It was some crazy statistic. Now, thankfully, not that many pregnant women die. I mean, like the second leading, not that many pregnant women die, thankfully, but I just mean, it was amazing to me. So we're like, we want to provide some additional protections, because he clearly was not killing her, just for her. He clearly wanted to end the life, and you get into the whole issue of abortion. I'm a pro-life person. I have very strong views about that. I would argue my views are very scientifically based, but I understand not everybody is in the same place. Unfortunately, trying to protect an unborn child, when there's an argument about that's before viability, it gets into, are you trying to ban abortion, which was not really the aim of that bill. Maryland is a state that even if Roe versus Wade was overturned, it wouldn't change our state's abortion laws. So it was we were able, though, and the family really was this coming to testify and telling the story. And then we had lots of other stories of similar situations where people were targeted because they were pregnant. So we ended up, Bobby Zirkin, who was our chairman of the committee at the time, of course, he's a Democrat, but very, very common sense, and certainly like pro public safety, pro law and order Democrat, was saying, what can we do? And Mike Huff and I, Senator Huff, and a couple of the other a couple of the Democrats, we really tried to work out a solution where we made it very clear it's an enhanced penalty if you knowingly, if you commit a crime of violence, which is a long list of crimes, against a woman that you know is pregnant or that you believe is pregnant. We put that in as well. That you get, it's an enhanced penalty of, it's an extra felony and enhanced penalty of sentencing. Didn't go as far as I frankly really felt like I wanted to go, but it was a major undertaking, but we had to really do a lot of maneuvering and amending, and it passed both bodies pretty much unanimously, but that doesn't tell the whole story of, we almost lost it the weekend before Siney died because it got roped into some other issue that was very controversial. And anyway, it'd be hard to even explain to people who don't understand what the final days of session are like. But I was literally,
I get it.
I was literally running down from the Senate chamber to the print shop because a bill has to be printed before it can be sent back to the other house. And I was like trying to whip them to say, can we get it printed? I even missed a few votes because I was trying to, Bobby Zirkin's like, you got to get down there and be sure they get this thing over. And anyway, it's a long story, but it did pass, and it brought tremendous comfort and relief to the family. And I also think, and recently it's actually going to be charged in a terrible case in Baltimore. I think it shows we want to value, because before that, the law didn't treat a pregnant woman any differently than a woman who wasn't pregnant before about 20, 21 weeks. And it's like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I mean, whatever your views are, you get into the issue about when life begins, and I have my own view about it. I feel very strongly, but it was like, if you say knowing, they have to know they're pregnant. So it's not somebody who they wouldn't know. They had to know. And for these kind of cases, I was happy that we were able to say, let's get justice for all the victims of that kind of murder.
Absolutely.
But it was a heavy lift, and it was very stressful. It was stressful for me. I didn't care about my name being on the bill or getting a bill passed. The family was the story, and not just their story, but other stories were, to me, I felt such pressure to get that done. And we were able to, thankfully, and that, so that to me, that was probably my biggest legislative accomplishment of being there.
That's a great story, and what a huge accomplishment in this state. I mean, it really is. That's
and
great.
It wasn't only my accomplishment either. Like I said, there was a lot
Understood.
To get anything done. This is one thing you learn in the legislature. To get anything done, you really do have to build coalitions of people.
Absolutely.
And you may build a coalition with people that you don't agree with 9 times out of 10, but you find one issue that you can agree on, and you work on that. And so that was an example of that.
That's fantastic. So what's next on your agenda? What do you want to accomplish next? What do you still have left?
I really believe, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently because legislatively, we've had a lot of heavy lift stuff in the last few years.
Yes.
There's a number of things that impacted my county from a budget perspective that we were able to hopefully secure for the future. So there was some things with education funding and declining enrollments, and there was community college issues that, like small community colleges, like one in my county, that we're dealing with. So there was a lot of fiscal issues that we were dealing with that have been somewhat addressed. I actually think, on a larger budget issue, we're going to be in trouble in the future because we keep approving things that are going to increase spending exponentially in the out years. So those are all big fiscal issues. But as far as my priorities, really, one of the things that I wrestle with the most is we deal with things like labor, things like small business, the issues that have come up regarding race and policing and race, frankly, and we saw it in our committee in finance this year, a lot of issues regarding, racial issues regarding business as well. I really feel like I'm trying to figure out the way forward on a lot of things. One of the things that I think is really important that we don't talk about enough in public policy when we talk about underserved and underprivileged communities,
right,
is there's a lot of talk about privilege these days. And I'm still workshopping how to say this exactly, but the greatest privilege anybody really has is if they have 2 parents that love and care about them and are trying their best to raise them right. And I would say ideally two parents that are, mother and father together, married, but even possibly a divorced mother and father that are still working together to try. I mean, that's possible too. When and the parents don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be, like the greatest, it doesn't have to be Ozzie and Harriet or whatever, but if a child or children have parents in their life that care about them and are trying, all the studies and statistics show they're way, way more likely to not be in poverty, to not get in trouble, to delay having children, to delay, there's and all the other things that lead to poverty when people, have children out of wedlock when they're young or they're not married, or much more likely to be poor. And what I see in so many of our communities that are struggling, and it's not just African American communities. I mean, you see it in poor white communities in places like West Virginia, is when you have a breakdown of a family unit, and you don't have strong parents. That's like the pathway to education system is going to suffer, because teachers that are trying, and I see it, my wife, I know a lot, watching a lot of what she goes through in a very good school, but teachers in Baltimore City that are doing their very best. And when children are coming to school without being ready to come to school, they haven't eaten, they're not clothed properly, they're not ready for school, they're being raised by relatives that they don't see their parents. It's not dumping on a place like Baltimore to say that's a huge problem there, right? And what can we be, and I don't believe government can. Government can't replace that. Government can help people. There can be things to help people who need supports. But if we don't have strong parents and strong families, we're really putting ourselves behind the eight ball. So what are policies, any policies we pass to try to address inequities or try to redress inequality? What are any of these policies or any of these fiscal policies about education or whatever? What are they doing to help strengthen parents, create strong families? But also, what are we doing to make sure that people who end up with having children that really weren't ready to be parents, what can we do to make sure that they learn how to can grow? Because a lot of people, their parents weren't around, so now their parents, and they might want to do good, but they don't know. They don't have any examples. So I don't know what that is. Like, that's not a bill, right? Like the Good Act of 2022, right? I mean, that's, and in fact, I'm not even sure it's necessarily all that the government needs to do, but I think every policy we talk about, if we're talking about addressing what's happening in a lot of our communities that we call underprivileged or disadvantaged or whatever, we got to figure out what to do about that, like what we can do to make that better, because that's where, that's like trying to grow a garden on a pile of rocks. You can say we can put a lot of fertilizer, we can water it a lot, but if it's just rocks underneath, then it's hard for anything to grow. And so if we don't have a community with the rich soil of a family, of a family, and like I said, it's not to disparage a single parent either, but even helping single parents, how do we help them? I mean, but particularly, how do we get to where we have two caring parents in a situation that are at least going to try to look out for their kids' best interest and help them, And so anyway, that was a long-winded answer about what I'm looking at next. I'm looking at a lot of things, specific little pieces of legislation next year. I've got several things on the list, but I think as an overarching issue, that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about these days. And COVID really brought out we talk about it brought out the disparities. It really brought disparities if you're stuck somewhere without a loving, caring family, or frankly, even a family that's around. Forget loving and caring, even just around to basically take care of your basic needs. As a child, you're going to be way behind the eight ball.
Oh, I don't disagree at all. I think COVID hit us all in very different ways. And I can tell you, my kids go to Baltimore County schools, and it was a tough year all around, and they have two very strong parents in their lives. So I completely get what you're saying. I was trying to think.
It's tough enough for, it's tough enough when you've got two parents trying to help you. I mean, it's
Exactly. But I was trying to think as you were talking through that, how do you fix that problem? Because I do think it's a foundational problem that does need to be addressed. So go ahead.
If somebody has the exact answer, let me know. I think there's lots of different
I'll let you know.
Doing, but we need to be mindful. The first part of it is being mindful of it.
Right.
really the critical issue, or one of the real critical issues in our society today, and not just in Maryland, obviously, but all over the country.
Yep, absolutely. So to wrap things up, what is one unique thing or fun fact about yourself that you'd like to share? It doesn't have to be one either. So.
Yeah, well, you've already can tell that I'm long-winded, so that's, I'm a
I
one-man
like it.
filibuster. I think there's a couple of things. So I'm on the more fun side. I love sports in general. As far as I love watching sports, was never all that good at playing them, but I love college football is like my favorite sport to
Oh,
watch and engage with. I
I
love
knew
college.
I liked you.
Yeah,
So what's your team?
Well, I grew up. I was born into a University of Alabama family.
Okay.
It's always been my team. I didn't go to school there. I went to the Fighting Seagulls of Salisbury are my official alma mater team, but
Well, you got Nick Saban down there running your program, so you guys at least have that going for you.
I do. It was one of the greatest days of my life in retrospect was when they hired him. And
so we have that in common. I'm a Florida State Seminole alumni. So not necessarily an Alabama fan, but we are also not rivals. I think we lost him, Meredith.
Oh no. Uh-oh. This has never happened before. Maybe we give it a minute to see if it comes back.
And
because I guess what could happen, my thought, oh,
he's gone.
oh, maybe he'll come back in.
I'll send him a text and just let him know we lost
I'll
him.
stop the recording for right now, or I'll pause it. Hold on. Okay, you guys are good to go.
So being an alumni of Florida State, I have great respect for an amazing college football coach, which Nick Saban is definitely. So you were saying the best day of your life was when he was hired? Is that what you said?
Not the best day of my life. I said one of the better days of my life. I didn't say the best day of my life. Let's not
forget
get in
marriage
trouble.
and kids kind of comes ranks higher.
But that's definitely, there's a lot of things ahead of that. But as far as my sports life, obviously I was a huge fan from the time I was a kid. And so I went through a lot of lean years. A lot of people go, oh, you're a front runner. It's like, no. I watched a lot of bad Alabama teams for like 15 years. And, he kind of came and shocked I would have been happy just getting back to competing, for a national title every once in a while. And they, obviously it's been an amazing run, but I love college football sort of all over the spectrum. And I like other sports too, but that's something I'm sort of a nut with that. And then Maryland's not as much of a college football place. It's more of a pro sports and college basketball, lacrosse, so I'm a little different that way. As far as uniqueness and how it might affect sort of public policy or how it affects my outlook on things, one of the things during this whole past, I started talking to some people about my background. When I lived in Mississippi for 11 years, my dad is a pastor, and he pastored a church in this town of Columbus for 9 years. That was basically we were basically a fully interracial church, and there really weren't a lot of those at that time in that area. And I played, like I had lunch with one of my colleagues who didn't know much about me, and we had been sort of at loggerheads on a couple of issues, some of it related to some of the racial equity issues and debating those things. And I said, you should know, my first baseball team I played on, there was 13 kids, and like 10 of them were African American, and both coaches were. So I'm not a guy that you can say, oh, you grew up in Carroll County. Well, I kind of grew up in places that were very diverse and maybe a little bit more, Carroll County is certainly much more, not as many African Americans, not quite as much racial diversity, just because of the way the community has been, more agricultural and rural. But I said, it gives me sort of a perspective on kind of, I'm not saying it helps me understand anything differently, but it just, there's just different experiences. When you grow up in two places, I think that helps you, to try to be able to see things and see things from both sides. And also, try to have an understanding of just different cultures and different communities. So that's sort of an interesting. So moving to Carroll County, people thought I was from like the sticks in Columbus, Mississippi, but the town I lived in had a shopping mall and had lots of stuff to it. And Carroll County in 1993 we've got a lot more stuff now than we did in 1993. So it's sort of
Right.
funny that dichotomy of coming to the, and I thought it was coming to the, the north, which Maryland's sort of not really the north. It's mid-Atlantic, but you just have a lot of unique experiences growing up in two places. So I think that's something that I think gives me some just a different perspective. So yeah.
Completely understood. I grew up in a small, very small Central Florida community that I think to this day doesn't have an indoor shopping mall. So,
well, a lot of places don't have indoor shopping malls anymore either.
well,
but
that's
for a
true.
different
They're all
reason.
closing down. That's so true. Well, thank you so much, Senator Reedy, for taking the time to be with us today. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you, and we look forward to having more opportunities to work with you moving forward.
Thank you. It's great to have a chance to talk, and I think this is great for people to be able to hear more about different elected officials and different people involved. So I think it's great.
Absolutely. So for more conversations with legislators and more online with Old Line, please visit oldlinelobbying.com.